Death is one of the most feared tarot cards, and yet only very seldom does it represent anything to do with the physical death of the body. It's a spiritual card, of course, as they all are, and in meditation, as we've seen many times in this series, we die to our perception of the outside world. Death's twin brother, sleep, which we all go through every night, both entering and exiting a veil, involves a dying of the day before and a dying of our perception of waking consciousness to be reborn the next morning. And so having a look here at the Death tarot card in the Thoth deck, we can see this is very different, as they all are, from the Rider-Waite skeleton image. In the Rider-Waite card we have a much more of a heraldic looking symbol, death as a pale rider, a horseman, carrying a mystic rose, or perhaps a rose associated with the Wars of the Roses, representing life, and him representing the duality therefore of death. Over on Thoth we have a card which is steeped in the Egyptian symbology of the entire Thoth deck and Aleister Crowley's work in general. This shows Osiris, of course, who was drowned in the waters, and his body parts cast all over Egypt. And so Crowley here is showing Osiris transforming and entering into the resurrection process of death, and so therefore it comes full cycle. And of course, if you look at the actual Egyptian story, Isis, of whom is the wife of Osiris, goes out to actually collect the body parts of which have been scattered in order to give them a respectful burial. She collects all the parts, apart from, believe it or not, his penis, which is swallowed by a fish. And we will see that later on referenced in the card, but it's worth knowing some of the backdrop. So on the Tree of Life, this is Path 24, which connects Tifereth to Netzach. This is quite an interesting one because, especially with the sphere of Tifereth, it can be associated with the birth of enlightenment, that joining of microcosm and macrocosm, what some would call Christ consciousness, or the consciousness of oneness. And that type of enlightened consciousness, of course, involves getting rid of the ego, getting rid of our connections and our dependencies upon this earth, which is in itself a type of death to the world. The Hebrew character found at the bottom of the card is the character of Nun, and Nun is thought to have its origins in a hieroglyphic of a fish in water, and so here the symbol is representing a fish. A fish, of course, has long been a symbol of fertility, and within Egyptian mythology it's the symbol of Osiris dying as a god in the water, and the story of which we encountered here at the beginning. Dying gods in general are often associated with the dying of the sun which gives us life, and this would be located and bringing us right back to the sphere of Tifereth, yet again, which we had with the Tree of Life. Even Jesus Christ could be associated with the sun, and tracing that back to ancient Egypt with the sun god Amun-Ra. In fact, Christ actually calls himself the Amun in the book of Revelations, and so Osiris being in many ways the origin of a lot of these Christ myths and other resurrected figures such as Attis and Dionysus and Adonis and so on. And so if we have a look at some of these characters, they were born of virgins, they had stars in the east representing their birth, they performed miracles, they were resurrected, and so on. This is going back to a type of monomyth, a type of very ancient and ancient historical concept which is often forgotten and has been changed via different cultures throughout the world. We can see the fish associated with Jesus within these type of hats which you will have seen cardinals, priests and things wearing. The astrological sign on the death card is that of Scorpio, and Scorpio here can be associated, believe it or not, with both sex and death, or sexuality and death. And you can read more about this if you look at the house of Scorpio being the 8th house in the natal charts. We can see Scorpio represented here with the actual scorpion, of course, on the card, this symbol, which takes place under the sea, of course, most of these images on the death card here on the Thoth deck. And this scorpion here is associated with the illusory nature of death, or the lower forms of the understanding of death, and so it's the materialistic side of death. So those of us who deny that we are actually infinite consciousness deny the wonder of life itself, the wonder of the world, and in order to follow that will and that true will and things of which we've seen in Thelema. This comes from the idea that if a scorpion is in a situation that it feels that it can't win, that it would sting itself to death. It represents that hopelessness and that idea and suggestion of death as the end of everything, where, of course, if you were to look at it spiritually, there would be a continuation and a reunion with those who have gone before, which is seen in the near-death experience and so on and so forth. You can see the scorpion is in between a lily on the left and a lotus on the right. These flowers have an association with Saturn and the energy of Saturn, and so they are also said to represent Alpha and Omega, so the scorpion is in between the beginning and the end, putting it in a liminal state yet again. And so this can show that the scorpion is physical life trapped in between time. It's trapped in the passage of time and the resurrection of time. It's the beginning and the end, and then back to the beginning and back to the end, and so on and so forth. It's consciousness trapped within that cycle. We also have this symbol of the fish and the serpent entwined on the card. This, of course, takes us firstly back to the Osiris story within the Egyptian mythology, and the idea of the phallus of Osiris. The fish, of course, can also represent semen and male sexual fluids in some of these type of esoteric images, although here it can really be representing the phallus of Osiris story, and the masculine energy can be the serpent, which you can interpret again as the Kundalini if you wish so, but it's less evident here, and the fish would be the feminine energy, and so you've got them both together representing the act of creation that we've seen so many times in these cards, and the birth of a new life and a new incarnation into life. So life in general takes place in between consciousness and unconsciousness. Death and life are seen as two aspects of the same coin. They're all infinite. There is really no death. There is merely different, if you put it into modern context, different vibrations and frequencies and so on. And so here you can see life and death as the curves and the coiling of the serpent, the ups and downs of the curves on the serpent being the passages between life and death. And really it's saying that it's all about perspective. And you can also see on the card at the top, near the actual top of the skeleton, an eagle. And the eagle here is a different type of death. It's not that physical death that we saw down with the scorpion. This is the death of the ego, the death of our connections with this world, as we said, and so therefore once that part of us dies, we achieve that oneness with our creator, that oneness with Kether, the spiritual white light, with the microcosm, macrocosm, or simply with God. The oneness of all creation occurs when we have no ties which are tying us into this world. And that's not to say, of course, as some in the New Age do, that you should shun physical belongings and physical life, because remember, everything is a duality and a balance. And of course we exist here in this physical world, so let's enjoy it. But this is saying that, of course, there is that higher level, that oneness which occurs with the death of the ego. The eagle can also represent the spiritual orgasm. We're going back to the idea of Osiris's phallus being lost in that story. And so what we have here is like an explosion of light coming through it. You can see all these threads, and these threads connect it to the rest of the card. And so you have within that orgasm being a spiritual experience, it can be the origin of a new type of physical life coming. And so within that type of spirituality brings into it a type of physicality, which in itself is a new incarnation yet again. And so we have there three different sort of types of death, and therefore basically a circle of life. We have that new incarnation, we have its physical form, and we have its spiritual form transcending that of the physical. And so really we have just as much about life in the card as what there is about death, and indeed that's what these bubbles here on the card are symbolic of. They are incarnations of the soul. These bubbles show inside them different ages of life, different forms of life incarnate. And so we have, for example, like an adult, male and female, we have a child, and we even have a sperm, just a single sperm. And the bubbles are actually held together with like a web or threads, and if one is to trace this web down, you can see where it would join into the skeleton. This clearly is the bringing back of the phallus to Osiris, and so we have a wonderful duality here. You can see Osiris as death himself, as this grim reaper holding a scythe, and he appears to be destroying these incarnations with his scythe, and so he's destroying life. And yet his phallus, which comes up through the incarnations, is creating life. And of course that's the very powerful energy of the sexual magic and the transcendence of consciousness and so on. Osiris is depicted as this black skeleton, and the colour black is the colour of Saturn. And Saturn on the Tree of Life is associated with Binah. And Binah is all about form, of course, physical form. And of course physical form, things of beauty do not last forever, they decay. And so even structures that we have built can decay and die, and therefore are a mirror of our transient lives within these human bodies. Saturn is also, of course, Old Father Time. It's the concept of time that we have here in the physical world. The higher creations and the higher vibrations of life have not got this context of time. It's only us with this idea of mortality, of whom have time. And so he here represents death as a tarot card itself, which is not just about death, of course, it's about transformation. It's about the death of one thing and the birth of another. And just to really drive home that on the Thoth tarot, this character is Osiris. You can see he has this crown upon his head. He's wearing actually the crown of Upper Egypt, and it has within it the feathers of Mart. Mart, the goddess of whom has her own association with the god of wisdom, Thoth, in ancient Egypt. She is the personification of truth. She is all about cosmic order, justice, and the ways of which the world go together, and that's what we're seeing really on the card. Between the legs of the skeleton underneath, and just as the scythe sweeps in here, you can see death actually occurring. These two figures between the legs here of the skeleton are actually dying, so he's destroying them, and they're going down, of course, the lower part of the card. And some have suggested that the shape of the legs here of the skeleton can also represent the alchemical glyph of Saturn itself, so a wonderful little nod to what we've been talking about there as well. The figure on the right hand side here, its head is going through the side, so you could almost suggest that it's being beheaded. The scythe is crossing its neck, and the upper figure therefore is coming out, and it's the freeing of his mind. He's been freed from death, and so you can see to suggest this, that there's a type of light around them. In the background there is a light enveloping them, and so that's the light of which is seen upon death. People suggest that they see this light in a tunnel and so on the near-death experience, where it's the soul being absorbed into spirit. It's the crossing from one frequency of consciousness to another frequency of consciousness. And so to draw this card in your tarot reading needn't instill the fear that it does in a lot of beginners to looking at tarot. It simply means that something in your life is dying, and this can mean a structure that you've created, a habit, a way of which you have looked at the world. It's basically saying not so much about death, but about new beginnings, about a new transformation. And so even, like, for example, if you were to face your fears and come out the other end not frightened of them, you have died to that fear, and so it's really about growth. You must bury the old, and change and transform.